Hello, everyone. My name is EunYoung Lee. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology and Health Studies at Queen's University in Canada. I would like to thank the organizing committee of this year's International Sports Science Congress for giving me the opportunity to present some of my research work on the topics of physical activity and social determinants of health during COVID-19. In today's presentation, I will start by discussing the impact of COVID-19 on our daily lives, including changes to physical activity. I will also briefly discuss how the social determinants of health manifested during COVID-19 with the studies that my lab has conducted using data from Canada and South Korea. Then I will finish my presentation with conclusions and future recommendations. So we are all witnessing and experiencing the impact of COVID-19 on our daily normal lives. And I gotta say, it hasn't been easy for anyone. The COVID-19 pandemic and the following lockdowns and public health restrictions have negatively impacted our health behaviors. And globally, we have observed reduced physical activity, increased screen time, as well as sedentary behavior, increased alcohol consumption, and increased drug use. As well, more people are working from home, and due to school closures at different degrees by country, children and youth have been engaging in remote learning, therefore lack of opportunities for physical education classes. Moreover, health inequalities that we observed pre-pandemic have widened during the pandemic as well. So those who are already vulnerable are experiencing more challenges in many aspects of their lives. Opportunities for and participation in physical activity have also been profoundly disrupted due to the pandemic. So new public health measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, such as closing public spaces, including outdoor parks, playgrounds, and indoor recreational centers, have negatively impacted opportunities for participating in physical activity outdoors, as well as in public indoor spaces in all age groups, such as indoor gyms. And also school closures, it affected lack of physical education opportunities for children and youth. So such downward trend in physical activity opportunities is alarming because it has been compounded with the co-occurrence of other unhealthy behaviors, including increased alcohol consumption and substance use, and increased sedentary behavior, which has negatively impacted mental health and well-being overall. In addition, population groups that were already predisposed to being less physically active are more likely worse off now. So before we get into the details of my research project, social determinants of health is a primary tenet of my research program. So I want to briefly discuss this before we get into the details. So World Health Organization defines social determinants of health as the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age, and the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life. And Government of Canada recognizes the following variables as important social determinants of health. So that includes income and social status, employment and working conditions, education and literacy, childhood experiences, gender, culture, race, racism, disability, etc. In my recent studies examining physical activity during COVID-19, looked at the changes in physical activity and social determinants of health that have substantial impact on unfavorable changes to those behaviors. So in this presentation, I present some of the findings from 3 recent studies that my lab has conducted. So the first study that I'll briefly discuss is the study that has examined the association between social class and indoor physical activity with the immigrant status as the key variable. We used the national level cross-sectional data from 4,052 Canadians aged 25 years and older who participated in the Canadian Perspectives survey series. And a series of decision tree analysis were conducted. So we looked at the data using quantitative methods. And the primary rationale behind of this study was that in the Canadian context, immigrants may face different challenges in participating in social and health-related activities, including physical activity, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly with the upsurge of violence towards immigrants and racialized communities. And today, for the purpose of the presentation, I'll only discuss the results of outdoor physical activity. So the main result, as you can see on the left side of the slide, 72% of the Canadians reported that they participate in outdoor physical activity during the pandemic, while among immigrants, only 52% indicated that they participate in outdoor physical activity during pandemic. And here you can see in total, 68.6% reported that they participate in outdoor physical activity. So as you can see in the second row here, more Canadians reported that they participate in outdoor physical activity than immigrants. And if you see among Canadians only, those who are educated, so 79.8% reported that they participated in outdoor physical activity compared to 66.7% among those who are less educated. So among Canadians, education was a big factor in determining outdoor physical activity participation. And on the right side, as you can see, among immigrants, so 52% of the immigrants reported that they participate in outdoor physical activity. Among those who are not employed compared to employed but absent from work, or employed and work at least part of the reference week, or employed but absent work for reasons not related to COVID-19, were more likely to participate in outdoor physical activity, so 62.1% compared to 45.3%. And among those who are immigrant and those who are not currently employed, financial impact was an important factor. So those with minor or no financial impact due to COVID-19 were more likely to participate in outdoor physical activity compared to those who experienced major or moderate impact, financial impact due to COVID-19. So to summarize, in other words, the group, which population group participates in more outdoor physical activity during COVID-19, it was Canadians versus immigrants, and among Canadians, those who were educated compared to those who are less educated. But among immigrants, those who are not employed, and also those with minor or no financial impact compared to major or moderate impact, reported that they participate in more outdoor physical activity. So among Canadians and Canadian immigrants, you can see that different factors influence their participation in outdoor physical activity. So some of the conclusions from this Canadian study: disparities may exist in accessing outdoor spaces for physical activity across different social class groups during COVID-19, particularly among those who immigrated. Within the Canadian-born population group, educational attainment was a big factor. So those who were educated were more likely to participate in outdoor physical activity compared to those who were less educated. So to conclude, future research should investigate ways that could equitably promote access to outdoor physical activity during times when broad-scale stay-home orders are in place, as well as beyond the pandemic era. So we know that, you know, immigrant status and educational attainment, social class, income, they all influence physical activity levels among any population that we look at. So it is important to consider those factors when planning physical activity promotion at the population level. In the next study, we examined the changes in 24-hour movement behaviors among South Korean adolescents. So we used the data from Korean Youth Risk Behavior web-based survey in 2019 and 2020. So each survey data included approximately 45,000 people, excluding missing cases. And exposures included gender, family, economic status, financial impact due to COVID-19 from 2020 data, and academic performance. Outcomes included meeting 24-hour movement guidelines, and I will introduce what these guidelines are in the next slide. And for analysis, we used the decision tree analysis, interaction moderation, and stratified regressions. So before we get into the findings, I would like to introduce 24-hour movement behaviors. So it is published in 2017 by the Canadian researchers. So right now, many countries have 24-hour movement guidelines for children and youth, and this was the first one that was published globally. So if we look at specific recommendations within the 24-hour movement guidelines for moderate to vigorous physical activity, more than 60 minutes daily is recommended. For recreational screen time, on a daily basis, no more than 2 hours per day is recommended. And as for sleep, uninterrupted 9 to 11 hours of daily sleep for those who are less than 13 years old, and 8 to 10 hours of sleep is recommended daily for those who are 14 and 17 years. So given these recommendations, we looked at the adherence to 24-hour movement guidelines in 2019 and 2020 among Korean adolescents. And what we found is that for moderate to vigorous physical activity and sleep, there were no substantial changes. So when we look at moderate to vigorous physical activity, in green line here, pre-COVID-19, it was only 6.1% who met the recommendation. During COVID-19, it was 5.8%. So there was a slight decrease in the proportion of meeting the moderate to vigorous physical activity recommendation, but not substantial. When we look at sleep in purple, it was similar. So pre-COVID-19, 19.6% of adolescents met the sleep recommendations, whereas during COVID-19, 19.4% met the sleep recommendations. So it was pretty similar pre-COVID and during COVID. And the substantial difference was found for screen time recommendations. So those who met screen time recommendation was 32.2% during pre-COVID-19, whereas during COVID-19 was 20.2%. So less than 12% of adolescents met the screen time recommendation during COVID-19 compared to pre-COVID-19. So in other words, we can interpret these results as seeing no changes in physical activity and sleep, but seeing a decrease for screen time. So more adolescents are engaging in screen time behaviors. So more adolescents are watching TV, playing more video games, and just spending more time in front of a screen. When we look at gender disparities using the 2020 data, those who are meeting the moderate to vigorous physical activity recommendation was 8.7% among boys and 3% among girls. Almost triple more boys were engaging in physical activity compared to girls. When we look at screen time recommendation, it was pretty similar between genders. So among girls, it was 19.9% who met the screen time recommendation, whereas in boys, it was 19.6%. So only 0.3% difference. that we observed for screen time recommendation. For sleep recommendation, again, boys were more likely to meet the sleep recommendation. So 19.2% met the sleep recommendation among boys, whereas in girls, the corresponding percentage was 12.6%. But as you can see, overall, meeting different individual recommendation is really low among Korean adolescents. So when we look at the correlates, so population groups that are more likely to meet moderate to vigorous physical activity recommendation, as you can see in this graph, it was boys. So more boys were more likely to meet physical activity recommendations than girls. And among boys, high economic status and low academic performance were more conducive to meeting physical activity recommendation among boys. Among girls, low academic performance and high economic status were also more conducive to meeting physical activity recommendation among girls as well. As for screen time, so we found that there were essentially no gender differences in terms of meeting the screen time recommendation. And the most important predictor based on the decision tree analysis was academic performance. So those who performed better academically were more likely to meet screen time recommendation compared to those who perform poorly in academics. And among those who perform well, high economic status and being a boy were more conducive to meeting screen time recommendation. As for meeting the sleep recommendation, similar to physical activity, more boys were meeting the sleep recommendation compared to girls. Among boys, high academic status was an important predictor for meeting the sleep recommendation. Among girls, low and middle academic performance was more associated with meeting the sleep recommendation compared to high academic performance. So some of the important conclusions from the South Korean study: no significant changes were observed for meeting physical activity and sleep recommendations, but meeting screen time recommendation worsened during pandemic. In terms of gender disparities, girls were less likely to meet physical activity and sleep recommendations, similar to previous studies during pre-pandemic. So there were no changes in terms of gender disparities in meeting physical activity and sleep recommendations. But for meeting the screen time recommendation, gender was not an important predictor. So boys and girls, they engaged in similar amount of screen time, regardless of their genders. But the important predictor for meeting the screen time recommendation was high academic performance. So those who perform better academically were more likely to meeting screen time recommendations compared to those who perform poorly. Lastly, high economic status and low academic performance were supportive of meeting physical activity and sleep recommendations. And these are, pretty similar to research evidence outside of South Korea. So lastly, some of the strategies for post-pandemic era to promote physical activity and get back to normal. First of all, it is important to increase equitable access to public spaces where people can engage in different types of physical activities. So it includes outdoor spaces as well as indoor spaces. So building healthy communities is really important. The next one, healthy schools. So providing equal opportunities for physical activity would be really important for the post-pandemic era. And school-based physical education could be a really good, viable option to increase physical activity among both boys and girls. Lastly, healthy populations. So focusing on population groups that experience more barriers to physical activity would be important. So among Canadians, those who are immigrated, those who experience more financial impact due to COVID-19 will be an important population subgroup that we need to focus among South Korean adolescents. Girls with low family academic status and high academic performance require more attention than other population groups. So this is my presentation for today. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, you can email me or you can tweet me. And I also provide my webpage address here. Thank you.